This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is Nazir daf Kaf Hey. We are on the bottom line of Kaf Dalet Amabet, and I'm going to share my screen to get us really started. So the Mishnah that we started with yesterday detailed what happens to the animals and money that's been set aside for Nazir sacrifices if a husband revokes his wife Nazirut after she set them aside. So again, the process is the follow. The woman becomes a Nazir. Let's say she says a stam Nazirut, so it's for 29 or 30 days. As we saw, there's a machlokas about it. Maybe I should just say a 30-day, and she says that there's going to be a 30-day Nazirut, so it's for 30 full days. The 30th day ends. It's day 31. She needs to, take care of cutting her hair and shaving her head and doing all the details. And then she's going to offer the sacrifice. Now, what happens if before she offers those sacrifices, the husband says, you know what? I didn't know that you were, I was out of town. I just heard that you made yourself in Nizirah for the last 30 days. Well, I didn't want you to do that. I am hereby revoking your vow. So as a result, the entire 30-day period, it doesn't make a difference. Her entire Nizirut essentially goes away. And now what happens to these various sacrifices? So there could be two different ways that she will have set aside things for sacrifices. She could have already set aside the animal. And so if she set aside an animal that belonged to the husband, we learned yesterday that the animal's not sanctified because the husband, whatever rights he would have given to her in the animal were conditioned on her actually needing the animal. And so as a result, now that she does not need the animal and she has not yet brought the animal as a sacrifice, so as a result, the animal is not sanctified and can go back to the flock and doesn't have to do anything. On the other hand, if the animal belongs to her, we learn that if it's a sin offering, well, it's a problem because you can't undo a sin offering. You can't do it for anything else, and you can't bring a voluntary sin offering. So basically, the sin offering, the animal has to be left to die, and the Ola and the Shlomim, they are offered as voluntary versions of their respective offerings. The Shlomim is offered in a special manner, just as the Shlomim for a Nazir is only eaten edible for one, you're only allowed to eat it for one day. So to this one, we'd say you can only eat it for one day. And although the shlomim for a nazir or a nazirah would ordinarily require bread to be brought with it, we will not require the bread here. So basically, we take the chumras of both directions. We take the chumrah, of not eating it beyond the first day, and we don't include the bread because we don't want to require something that's only we don't want to make it look different than the ordinary shlomim. So that's what happens if the woman sets aside the animal. Now, if on the other hand she set aside money, so then we can distinguish between two cases. So just as we distinguish between two cases with respect to the animal, an animal that originally belonged to the husband or an animal that belonged to the wife, we can distinguish between two cases of money, although this time we're not distinguishing between who gave her the money. We're going to assume that because she's holding the money, it belongs to her. But was the money set aside for sacrifices generally, but not that this money is for the chatas, this money is for the ola, and this money is for the asham. In which case, if it's general, we said that it can be used for all voluntary sacrifices. It just goes into the voluntary sacrifice pool, and that voluntary sacrifice pool is for ola sacrifices, and it's brought when in order to keep the altar busy during the course of the day. Or if the woman actually set aside and dedicated the money for specific sacrifices, well, then the money is essentially treated like the animal associated with them. The chatas money gets thrown into the Dead Sea. The ola money is used for an ola. The shlomim money is used for a shlomim. And just like the shlomim, the animal, we would say that the shlomim money gets used for a shlomim that is edible only for the first day and also does not include the bread that would ordinarily be with a shlamim for a Nazir. So yesterday we talked about the first two of these situations, the animal situation, and now we're going to pick up on the bottom of Kafdal and Mabet with an analysis of the money that was generally set aside, meaning it wasn't specified that any particular dollar went to any particular korban. It was just said that it was going to go to the sacrifices of a Nazir generally. So if you had money that was going to that was susum, meaning it was not specified, it was general, it was closed on some level. That's the word, the root for susum. So the funds did not have any details associated with how they would be used. Well, then Yiplul Ndava, if they could be used now, they go into the fund, into the special kupa, the special box that would take care of the funds that are associated with special offerings that are offered on the altar when the altar's not, in order to keep the altar busy. And so that is, it's not a direct quote from our Mishnah, and Tosfos suggests that actually our Mishnah was talking about where, maybe you had intended the funds for one of the korbanot, but now we want to discuss a situation where you clearly intended the funds for all of the korbanot. So we're going to understand either that our Mishnah was talking about where there's a pile of money that was intended for all three korbanot, or we're talking about a Mishnah over in Tamura where it's clear that that's what we're talking about. But in any event, the Gemara opens with the following question: V'halo demei chatas mu'aravin behen. How can we allow all of the money to go towards general olot sacrifices? We have a problem because some of the money was clearly intended. We didn't specify which of the money, but some of the money was clearly intended for a sin offering. And that money you're not allowed to benefit from it. So we're going to offer two answers to this question. So answer number one is Amar Rabbi Yochanan, halakha hi benazir. It is simply halakha l'Moshe Sinai, and in connection with Nazirut. And so as a result, that's why we have this rule. And so and in fact, if we take a look, we can say take a look at Tosfos here. It's the first full Tosfos on Kaf Hey Amud Aleph. It's near the bottom of the narrow lines in Tosfos. Halakha hi benazir. And what do we mean? Halakha l'Moshe Misinaihu. It's a halakha from Moshe at Har Sinai. Last week's Torah portion, when we had the giving of the Aseret Dibros, and Moshe goes back up, and as we'll see at the end of this week's parsha, and so maybe we can call this a nice Daf Yomi coincidence, and so he'll receive all of the halachot associated with the Torah. Distumin, that because when you have money that is unidentified, yipul nedava, that's the general rule. That's the rule that was taught to Moshe at Har Sinai. And the rule applies, even though the money of a sin offering is included in it. Moreover, we'll actually see that it's not only when, but it's specifically when, meaning if you that it's specifically when you have the money of a sin offering included, that is when as niskabla halacha sheyiplu l'nedava. That's when all the money will go towards the nedava pile. And again, the nedava pile is, as we saw, I think all the way back in Pesachim, or maybe it was shkalim. That pile went all to nedava offerings, which were specifically ola offerings to keep the altar busy during downtimes if there weren't enough people who were offering personal offerings. Aval im dmei ola v'shlamim levad, as we continue in this at the end of the second line of the Tosfos. But if in fact the money was only for money for an ola and a shlamim alone, muravin yachad, that got mixed up together. Lo ne'emar behen sheyiplu l'nedava. We wouldn't say for that pile of money, which just included Ola and Shlomim money, that it all goes for Ola offerings that are to keep the altar busy. Ela yavi chetzion Ola, the chetzion Shlomim. But rather, you would bring half of it for an Ola and half of it for a Shlomim, because those are the two together. Only when all three are mixed, and it's just halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It doesn't mean that there's any logical reason to it. It's just a way of dealing with the situation, that when it's not specified, that's how we handle it. Now, the second answer is the one that and Reish Lakish's answer is the one that we are going to discuss for the rest of today. We will return to Rabbi Yochanan's answer tomorrow. So if you want to hear more about that, you're going to have to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. So Reish Lakish says, L'chol nidreihen u'l'chol nidvosam, that we actually can learn it from a pasuk. This pasuk, which deals with, it's from Sefer Vayikra, Perek Kafbet, pasuk Yudchet. So it says, Ish mi beis Yisrael umin hager Yisrael, any Jew or a stranger who is living with Israel, presumably this is talking about a convert. Asher yakriv karbano l'chol nidreihem l'chol nidvosam, who brings a sacrifice that is based on a neder or a promise or voluntarily. Asher yakrivu la'Hashem le'olah, that is coming to bring it as an olah. So what Reish Lakish says is this verse, which talks about bringing an olah, refers to nidreihen, vows. And what is that suggesting? HaTorah Amar Mosar Neder Yehei L'Nedava, that when you make a neder that causes you to bring a korban, what's left over, any extra money, is going to go to the Nedava pile, to the voluntary Ola pile. And so as a result, we're going to learn from a pasuk that in fact, this mixture of money, which because it's no longer associated with a Nazir, because the Nazirah had her Nazirut revoked by her husband. So here, as a result, it's essentially leftover funds, and the leftover funds go, according to this pasuk, to voluntary Ola offerings. So Bishlam Rabbi Yochanan de Amar Halacha He ben Nazir. So now it all makes sense. The fact that we talk about Rabbi Yochanan, that he says that the halacha it's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So amtu lahachi stumin ein mifurashin lo. That's why when it comes to unspecified funds, we say that they go to the voluntary offerings, but when it has been specified, they don't. But Ela l'Reish Lakish, l'chol nidreyan l'chol nidvosam, based on that pasuk that says that if you've got any leftover funds, it goes to the voluntary offerings. My area stumin afilu mifurashin. Even if in fact the funds were specified, why don't we say that extra funds go to voluntary offerings? Let it apply in that situation as well. So that's the question that the Gemara asked. So again, the point is that for Reish Lakish, why are we distinguishing between specified funds and non-specified funds? So Rava offers an answer. Mifurashin lo matzis amra. You can't say that extra specified funds can go to a voluntary offering, because we've learned a rule associated with that. And that rule is Kvar Paska Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael. It was already concluded. There was a halacha conclusion that was learned in a brisa taught in the school of Rabbi Yishmael. And we'll see that Rabbi Yishmael is actually the author of this brisa. So what does it say? Let's take a look. So the verse says, Rak kodashecha asher yiyu lecha undarecha. So this is a pasuk in Dvarim, Perek Yud Bet, pasuk Kaf Vav, that discusses Tamura offerings. These are or offspring of sacrifices. So you have something where and this verse says, "Rak kadeshecha asher yiyulecha," only your animals which you will have, undarecha tisa, and your vows you shall take them, uvasa elamakom asher yivchar Hashem, that you should take them to the place that Hashem will choose. And the next pasuk significantly talks about, you're going to make your olah offerings, the meat and the blood, upon the altar of Hashem your God, and the blood of your sacrifices shall be poured upon the altar of Hashem your God, and you shall eat the meat. So it's clearly talking about olah and shlamim kind of sacrifices. And in that situation, what do we say? So we say bivalde kodshim ubetumura hakasum medaber. This pasuk is talking about, from the context, it's talking about shlamim and olah sacrifices. But we already had these sacrifices detailed in Sefer Vayikra. And so as a result, the rabbis understand that this verse is talking about what happens in two cases. One is you have some kind of offering, let's say an olah offering, and it turns out that the olah offering that you have has a baby. And so as a result, the female animal was pregnant. And so now you have a new child. So what happens to that? Because when you sanctified it, it was sanctified with the pregnancy inside. And so as a result, how do we have to handle the offspring? Or what happens if, in fact, you were to say, I want to substitute this animal for that animal after you've already sanctified it? Well, we have a halacha in Tamura that tells you that that doesn't work. You may want to try to say that I want this animal to replace that animal as my sacrifice. But the Torah tells us that both the original animal and the replacement animal both become sanctified. So matakanasan. So what do we do with them? So tisa uvasa elamakom asher yivchar Hashem. So the next pasuk, as I quoted, tells us. The end of that pasuk tells us that we bring it to the place that Hashem chose, namely Yerushalayim and the Beit HaMikdash. So Yachal Ya'ala Beit HaBechira, I might have thought that you went up to the Beit HaMikdash, V'yimna Mehen Mayim Umazon B'Shvil Shiamusu, and there you starve the animal in order for it to die, because again, maybe you're not allowed to offer this replacement animal or this child animal. Well, Talmud Lomar V'asisa Olasecha Habasar B'Hadam. Well, then the next pasuk tells us that you need to make it your olah and the meat and the blood, and again, the end of that pasuk references, and you shall eat the meat, which indicates that it's a shlamim. So clearly, it seems like lomar lucha. So it's obviously that second pasuk comes to teach us kederu she'ata noheg be'olah nahog b'tmura. So just as you observed with the olah, so you'll observe with its replacement. Kederu she'ata noheg b'shlamim noheg nahog b'valdehen, and just as you observe with respect to the shlamim, you'll observe with respect to the offspring. And of course, this is not being specific. It's both directions, meaning it could also be a child of an olah or a replacement of a shlamim. And so, actually, no, I'm sorry, I got the olah thing wrong, because the olah has to be male. I apologize. So the olah, it can only be a tamura, because you can't, because of course what matters is is only the child of a pregnant female. It doesn't make a difference if the male is a father of a child, because that wasn't part of the object that was made holy. So in any event, the point is that when it comes to the olah and its replacement, we're going to treat it like the original, meaning that you can bring it as an olah. And similarly, when it comes to a shlamim, which is a female animal, which could have either a tamura or offspring, so then you're going to you are going to bring that offspring or the replacement animal also as a shlamim. So Now, Yachol Afblad Chatas Utmura Asham Kain. Now, I might have thought that the same thing would apply to the child of a sin offering or the replacement of an Asham, that we would say the same thing. And here, the reason that we have the Tamura for the Asham is because, again, the Asham is a male animal and the Chatas is a female animal. So as a result, even though when it comes to the female animal, what the rule that we're saying would apply both to an offspring or to a tamura, but we're just going to reference one of them, but it's going to apply to both. But Talmud Lomer Rak, that pasuk, remember that second pasuk, or I'm sorry, that first pasuk, parak yudbet, pasuk kavav starts Rak kodashecha asher yiyulecha, only. So what does that only come to tell us? It comes to tell us that this is only the rule for an Ola and a Shlamim. And the Chatas and the Asham are not subject to this rule. And indeed, we will see that the Chatas must be left to die, and an Asham must be left until it gets a mum, and then it can be exchanged. So Divrei Rabbi Yishmael, that's what Rabbi Yishmael comes to tell us. And so what do we see from this? We see from all of this why it is that Reish Lakish says that when it comes to specified funds, we can't apply the rule of l'chol nidrehen l'chol nidvosam to say that extra specified funds get used as for voluntary Ola offerings. Instead, we have to say that the specified funds are treated like the specified animal. And so as a result, when it comes to the Ola, when it comes to the Chatas, we are going to have to throw that money into the Dead Sea. Rabbi Akiva, the Brisa continues, Rabbi Akiva Omer Eino Tzarech. Rabbi Akiva says that when it comes to the Asham, you don't need that verse. When it comes to the Chatas, we'll see we'll see some more information about that in a moment. But when it comes to the Asham, the Rabbi Akiva says you can learn from the following. Harehu Omer Asham Hu B'Havayasa Yehei. The point is that because the animal says Asham Hu, that the Torah says Asham Hu, and this pasuk is in Vayikra Perek Zayin pasuk Hey. So that tells us that it is in Asham, meaning it's got to be in its original condition. And so as a result, if you were to have if it were to have, it can't have a child because it's male, but if it were to have a replacement, if it were to be switched out, well, then it cannot be offered because it's not in its original condition. And so that is the source that Rabbi Akiva offers. So but the bottom line is, and what matters for us is specifically the rule with respect to the sin offering, namely, which everybody agrees to, that you have to treat like the sin offering differently, and you cannot offer it as a sacrifice. And as a result, if you've specified the funds, well, then you cannot simply treat it all as Ola funds. So Katani, now 1 second. So now we're going to analyze this brisa further. Okay, so in the brisa, what did we say? We said that one might have thought we'll quote the language. So Yachol Ya'alem Leveta Bechira V'Yimna Mehem Mayim Umazon B'Shvil Shiamusu, that we might have thought that you would bring the Ola and the Shlamim up to Yerushalayim and let them die there. Talmud Lomar V'Asisa Ola Secha. So the next pasuk comes to say that you're going to actually use them as sacrifices. Now, Amai, why in the world would you have that Hava Amina that you would think that the animal should come up and be allowed to die? It is only in connection with the sin offering that we have a halacha l'Moshe Misinai that we need to let it die. So ilav kra, meaning, so the Gemara answers, well, ilav kra, if not for the pasuk that we're quoting, hava amina vlad chatas b'kol makom. I might have thought that when it comes to the child of a sin offering, that we will allow die wherever it is. But when it comes to, as we turn to Kapei Bet, but Vlade uvalde kachem bevesa bechira. But I would have thought that the sacrifices of Ola sacrifices and Shlomim sacrifices, when you have children or exchanges for them, that you would need to bring them to the Beis Hamikdash and allow them to die there. So Kamash Malan, so that's why we need the pasuk to come and tell us, no, don't allow them to die. Bring them as the Ola or the Shlomim as appropriate. So that's what. Now that we have that answer, so we understand why we might have thought that we should allow the animal to die, because we might have thought that a similar rule that applies to chatas should also apply to the shlamim and the ola replacements. So now that we've dealt with that, but 1 second, in the brisa we say that the offspring of so now we are going to deal with the next piece of the brisa and explain it. So Katani, the brisa taught Yochel af vlad chatas utamura asham came, that we might have thought that even the tamura, the offspring of a chatat and the tamura and the exchange of an asham would also be brought as actual sacrifices. Talmud Omer rak. So the pasuk came and told us, well, it's because it says rak at the beginning. It does not apply to the chatas and the asham. It only applies to the ola and the shlamim. So lama likra. Well, 1 second. Why do I need a pasuk to tell us this in the first place? We just said a moment ago, hilchasa gamirila. It's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Vlad chatas lamisa azol, that the offspring of a sin offering goes to death, meaning it does not get sacrificed. Well, Hachanami, you're absolutely right. When it comes to the sin offering, we did already know that from a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Ukra la'asham hu da'asa, and the pasuk is only coming to tell us about the asham offering, and so that's why we need the pasuk. So at the moment we understand that Moshe got at Har Sinai the halacha that if you have a sin offerings replacement, either because you tried to do a tamura or the sin offering itself had a baby, and now we're talking about the baby animal. So in those situations, we have a halacha l'Moshe Sinai that we need to leave the animal to its death. But when it comes to the asham, maybe how do I know what the rule is? So we know the rule from the fact that the pasuk says rak, that I might have thought that we would apply the same principle to the asham as to the shlamim and to the ola, in which case we do allow the replacement animal to be sacrificed. But when it comes to the asham, we don't allow it to be sacrificed. So asham nami hilchasa gamiri law. But now the Gemara questions that, because we also have an oral tradition, a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, that in fact that even an asham is also not going to be sacrificed if it's the replacement animal. So kol she'ilu b'chatas mesa ba'asham roa, because we have a principle that whenever a sin offering would be left to die, an asham would be left to graze. And we have the following principle, that basically the idea is as follows. An asham, unlike the sin offering, where we actually have to allow it to die, with an asham, what we do is the following. We allow it to stay in the flock until we separate it, so we know which animal it is, but we allow it to go out into the field. We keep it in the field until it develops a blemish. And once it develops a mum, well, then we're allowed to redeem it. And then the funds of that redeemed animal, then we can use those funds to buy an Ola offering. Okay, so that's what we're allowed to do. And we have this oral tradition that says that just as with a chatas, we don't actually offer it. Similarly, with an asham, we don't actually offer it. So why do we need the verse in the first place? So Ella rather, you're absolutely right. We actually have the law as an oral tradition. So hava amina hilchasa v'i akriva lo l'chayev aleg lo v'lo klum. I might have thought, yes, in fact, that is the right thing to do. That the halakha l'Moshe Sinai is that you're supposed to allow the asham to get and then you offer the use the replacement money by redeeming it for an ola. But if you were to actually sacrifice that animal, that asham, you wouldn't have any liability. Mashmalan kra de'i makrivle kaim ale ba'ase. So in the end, if you in fact are, but in fact, because we have the pasuk of Rak, it tells us that actually you have violated a positive commandment. And so as a result, because you violated the positive commandment, it's not as simple as just not having performed the mitzvah. It's not like, failing to do a positive, to do something that you were supposed to do, but rather it's as if you actually violated a positive commandment. And so that explains why we need the pasuk. So again, in the end, the brisa that we brought is really we have the halakha l'Moshe Sinai that tells us that we can't bring a replacement chatas or a replacement asham. We have to let them either die in the case of the chatas or get a mum in the case of the asham. But when it comes to the and so that is why Reish Lakish didn't have a problem limiting his rule to the case of unspecified funds. And the pasuk just comes to tell us that not only are you doing something wrong, are you not fulfilling a halakha l'Moshe Sinai, but if you don't actually do the right thing and you don't let it die in the case of a chatas and you don't let it get a mum in the case of the asham, well then in the end you have violated a positive commandment. So now we are going to ask the same question about according to Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva Omer Eino Tzarich, we didn't need the pasuk of Rak. Harehu Omer Asham Hu B'Havaya Soyehe. He says that we learn about the asham case from that pasuk. Well, what about, wait 1 second, why do we lama likra? Why did we need that pasuk in the first place? Gemara Gemirin La. Again, we say that it's a halakha l'Moshe Sinai. Kol shebechatas mesa ba'asham roa. Every time that a sin offering would be left to die, and asham is left to graze. And Tosfos asked the question, well, and why don't we just answer as we answered before that, okay, so just as the word rak taught us that in fact this was a violation of a mitzvah aseh if you did try to offer it, so too asham hu tells us that you're violating a mitzvah aseh if you do try to offer it. So Tosfos says that the problem is that the word rak is more of an exclusive situation. It is a situation where it is specifically intended to limit something. The who is not as clear a limitation, and so as a result, maybe that's why we didn't want to answer the same answer. So now, what are we going to answer in connection with Rabbi Akiva's question? So for the question on Rabbi Akiva, again, why does Rabbi Akiva need a pasuk when we already know that this is an oral tradition? So Hakanami, so too, yes, in fact, you are right. This is an oral tradition that we know that when it comes to an exchanged animal for an asham, you're not allowed to sacrifice it, and you don't need the pasuk to tell us it. And the pasuk is coming to teach us what Rav has taught. The Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav, because Rav Huna said in the name of Rav, Rav Huna taught us what Rav taught, and that is asham shenitak l're'iyah. That once we say, if we have an animal, we have an asham animal, and that asham animal was a replacement. So as a result, we are going to have to let it graze and develop a mum, and then we are going to use the replacement funds to buy an ola. But now let's say we didn't do that, unfortunately. But we did already put it out to pasture, meaning we sent it out to graze in order to get the mum. But before it got the mum, ushchato l'shem ola, you already slaughtered it for the sake of an ola. In that situation, kasher, it's considered kosher. It's a valid ola offering. because Taima Denita, because you've already put it aside. By putting it aside, you've taken away the Asham status to it. And so as a result, it's okay. Even though it's not what you should do, that's going to be fine. But halonitak, low. But if you have not yet put it out to pasture, and in order for it to develop a mum, and you offered it as an attempt, as an ola offering, or of course as an asham offering, that's not going to be an acceptable sacrifice. Amar Kra, who Bahavaya so yehe. It can only, this asham offering can only be offered when it's in its original condition. And this animal is not the original condition, because this animal is an animal that needs to go out to graze and was a replacement animal. So as a result, that's how we know that this that in fact, even according to Rabbi Akiva, he does something with the pasuk. And so even though in the end the halachas that we learn today are all halacha l'Moshe Sinai, we have additional psukim either to teach us that a positive commandment is violated if you don't do what you're supposed to, or to teach us that when the animal goes out to graze, it has lost its asham status, and if you were to bring it as an ola, it would be okay. But before that, before it's gone out to graze, it would not be okay. And so now we're going to, again, as I mentioned before, we mentioned the teaching of that two answers to the question about why it is that the pool of money that we've set aside can all go to voluntary offerings. And now we're going, and one of those answers, again, Reish Lakish's answer, which is the one we analyzed today, was based on the pasuk that we had of l'chol nidrehen u'l'chol nidvosam. And so we analyzed that answer today. But the first answer that we gave, which was Rabbi Yochanan's answer, is just to say that this is simply a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. And so now we're going to go back and analyze that answer, God willing, tomorrow. And so stay tuned. Again, as we tomorrow consider Rabbi Yochanan's perspective that this is all halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and that's the basis for saying that aggregate funds of the Nazir may be used for voluntary offerings in the various circumstances that we discussed yesterday, but in particular in the circumstance that we're talking about here, where a wife had made the Nazirut vow, and then set aside the funds in order to offer the various korbanot, and then the husband came and removed and revoked her vow. And so now what happens to those funds? So again, those funds all go to Ola offerings for when the altar isn't busy, when the Mizbeach is not busy. And so, but the details of that teaching we will consider, God willing, tomorrow.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good Shabbos all. Good Shabbos.
Have a wonderful Shabbos.